The morning I died, I was trying to remember the name of a bird. Not a remarkable bird, just a small, tufted thing that used to land on my windowsill in Valdosta when I was 9 years old, before my father moved us to the Indiana flatlands, and I never saw that particular species again. I was lying in the cardiac unit of St. Agatha's Medical Center in Harrowfield, Ohio, 73 years old, tubes running into my arm like roots finding their way into the soil of me, and all I could think about was that bird. My daughter Persephone, she goes by Percy, always has, was sitting in the blue vinyl chair beside my bed, her shoes off, her feet tucked under her the way she's done since she was 4 years old, and she was reading something on her phone. The heart monitor beside me made its patient, measured sound, and I kept thinking, was it a tufted titmouse? A chickadee? Something else entirely? They told me afterward that my heart stopped at 4:47 in the morning. Percy had fallen asleep. Her phone had slid from her hand and lodged itself between the cushion and the armrest, screen down, and she was breathing through her mouth the way her father used to, a sound like distant water moving over flat stones. The monitor flatlined. The nurses came. The paddles came. And in the space between those things, I went somewhere. I want to tell you what I saw. I want to be very precise about it, because I have spent 8 months now trying to write it down and failing, and I am determined that this time I will find the right words, or at least words that are close enough to the right ones that something essential is preserved. My name is Winifred Claudette Sproul. I am a retired geography teacher from Harrowfield, Ohio. I have been a Methodist my entire life, though I confess the Methodism sat on me like a coat that mostly fit, but pulled a little at the shoulders. I am not a woman given to visions. I have never believed in anything I could not locate on a map. What I am about to tell you, I cannot locate on any map I have ever seen. It began not with light, as people say. That is the version people tell, because light is the easiest thing to describe, and we are all of us reaching for the easiest thing when the real thing resists language entirely. What it began with was the absence of weight. Not floating precisely, more like the moment just before sleep, when your body remembers it does not have to hold itself up anymore. 73 years of holding myself up, of arranging my spine into the posture my mother demanded, of carrying the low, persistent ache in my left hip that had been my companion since my 50s. All of it released, the way a fist releases. I was aware that I was no longer in the room with Percy. I was also aware, in some peripheral and oddly unconcerned way, that my name was Winifred, that I had a daughter, that there was a bird I could not remember. These facts were present the way furniture is present in a familiar room in the dark. You know it is there. You are not surprised by it, but you are not particularly attending to it either. What I was attending to was the field. It was not a field in the way Ohio has fields, which are flat and practical and smell of fertilizer and damp earth. This was something older than that idea. The ground, if it was ground, had a quality of accumulated time to it, not aged in the way that things decay, but aged the way that certain stones are aged, patiently and without apology, having been present for so long that presence itself had become their primary characteristic. The color was not a color I have a name for. It was in the family of gold, but further from yellow than gold is, closer to what you see in the veins of certain types of quartz when light moves through them at the right angle. There were other people in the field. This is the part I have to be careful about, because it is the part most likely to be misread, most likely to collapse into categories that are too small for it. When I say other people, I mean beings who had been people, who carried their personhood the way the field carried its color, essentially without performance. They were not arranged in any particular way. They were not waiting for anything that I could perceive. Some of them were speaking to one another, and the speech made a sound like water over smooth rock, and I understood it without understanding it, the way you understand music without understanding music. I noticed almost immediately that the people in the field were of every kind, every shade of skin, every shape of face, every configuration of feature that you have ever seen in a lifetime of looking at other human beings, and all the configurations you have not. There was a woman whose darkness was so complete and so beautiful it seemed to generate its own light, the way deep water generates its own cold. She was laughing at something, and the laugh was the realest sound I had heard in a field full of sounds that were already more real than anything I had encountered in 73 years of living. There was an old man with a face like a topographic map of somewhere mountainous and wind-bitten, who was sitting very still and appeared to be listening to something I could not hear. There were children. There was a young man with braided hair so long it touched the middle of his back, who was holding a conversation with someone I couldn't see, his hands moving through the not quite air in gestures that seemed to be constructing something, some invisible architecture. I stood at the edge of all this and felt, I think, the most sophisticated version of what I can only call shyness. The shyness of someone who arrives at a gathering that has been happening for a long time without them and is not yet sure of the protocol. And then he was there. I am going to try to describe this accurately, and I am going to fail. And I am asking you to please hold that failure lightly and receive what is underneath it. He was not tall in the way that commanding figures are tall in paintings. He was present in the way that a source of heat is present, not seen first, but felt first, felt in the adjustment of everything around it. When I looked directly at him, I had the sensation of looking at something I had been looking for without knowing I was looking. The way you sometimes catch in a stranger's face a resemblance to someone you loved and lost so long ago that you have stopped actively mourning them. His face was, I have to tell you this plainly, the face of a man from that part of the world, olive in undertone, with the particular bone structure of the Levant, the heavy brows, the beard that was neither groomed nor neglected, but simply there, the eyes that were not one color, but all colors somehow resolved into one. He looked nothing like the paintings. He looked like he had walked a great distance and was not tired from it. He looked like someone who had seen everything that has ever happened to any person who has ever lived, and had been changed by that seeing in a way that made him not less present, but more distilled, more essential, more exactly himself. He looked at me with the full weight of that attention, and I felt what it is to be known completely. I want to dwell here for a moment, because this is the thing that language most catastrophically fails. Known completely. Not examined, not assessed, not judged in the way that word has come to mean, with the mechanics of verdict and consequence attached. Known the way a thing is known, when someone has been paying the closest possible attention to it for the longest possible time. Every single thing I had ever done, every meanness and every generosity, every moment of cowardice and every moment of surprising grace, every thought I had been ashamed of, and every thought that surprised me with its decency. He held all of it, and the holding was not neutral. It was not clinical. It was warm in a way that the word warm does not begin to cover. It was the warmth of something that has decided, something that has already chosen. He didn't speak in words at first. The communication was more direct than that, more like the way pain communicates, or joy, when they come in their most concentrated forms and bypass the whole apparatus of language and go straight to the part of you that is not words. What he communicated was, "Come." So I went. We walked, or something like walking happened, and we passed through the field and through the people in it, and no one seemed startled by this passage except me. Everyone else seemed to understand it the way you understand traffic, as simply the way things move. As we moved, I was aware of stories radiating off the people around us, the way heat radiates off pavement in August. Not the surfaces of their stories, the names and dates and facts, but the cores of them, the love that had organized each life, the grief that had shaped each life, the specific quality of each person's longing, and the specific ways each person had tried and failed and tried again to answer that longing. Every one of them was astonishing, every single one. I stopped beside the woman who had been laughing. I don't know why I stopped. She turned to look at me, and her face was the face of someone who has arrived at the place they were always moving toward and found it exactly right. She was, I want to be careful here. She was radiating something that I can only describe as the full maturation of a life. As if everything that had been difficult in her life, every door that had been closed, every diminishment, every violence done to her dignity or her body or her possibilities, every morning she had woken up in a world organized around her erasure. All of it had been taken in and metabolized and transformed into this enormous, luminous, unassailable personhood. She was not despite those things. She was in some way I cannot fully account for, partly because of what she had carried and how she had carried it. I looked at him, and he spoke then in the closest thing to words that he used in that entire encounter. What I received, and I say received because that is closer to what it was received the way a radio frequency is received when the dial turns to exactly the right position, was this: every person you see was made by me. Every single one, without qualification, without exception, without hierarchy. When you build a hierarchy among them, you build it out of nothing. There is no material for it here. What you call race is a garment, and the garment is beautiful. It is part of the beauty I put into the world. It is not a problem to be solved. It is a variation to be marveled at. But the garment is not the person. The person underneath every garment is mine. When you wound a person because of their garment, you wound something I made, and I know that wound the way I know every wound, completely, with full attention, with the weight of everything it costs. And then, more quietly, with something that felt almost like exhaustion, not his exhaustion, but something that had been handed to him from outside himself, the weight of what he had witnessed. They have suffered by the hands of those who claim to speak for me, and their suffering was a lie told in my name. And I want you to understand that there is no version of that lie that I do not see, no version that I have sanctioned, no version that does not grieve me down to the part of me that is beyond grieving. I am going to be honest with you, I was not prepared for this. I had lived 73 years in a body, in a country, in a tradition, in an ordinary life, and I had understood racism to be a problem in the way that many problems are problems, real, serious, requiring address, but ultimately existing at a level of social organization rather than cosmic significance. What he was telling me, what he was showing me, moved it from the level of policy to the level of the sacred. What had been done was not merely wrong in the way that errors are wrong. It had been done to things that were his, and he knew every particular of every instance of that doing, and his knowledge of it was not abstract. I thought, standing there, of every time I had been silent when silence was the easier choice, every assumption I had not examined, every convenience I had accepted. I had not been a cruel person. I had not been the specific kind of monster that history names. But I had benefited from arrangements I had not made and had not questioned with sufficient seriousness. And he knew that too. And he held it the same way he held everything, with full attention, without flinching, with the warmth that was already a decision already made. The woman had gone back to her laughing. I watched her for a long moment, and I thought, this is what it looks like when someone has been fully seen by the person who sees most completely. This is what the arrival of justice looks like. Not the correction of the record, not the accounting, but the full restoration of personhood to the one from whom personhood was stolen. She was not waiting for her vindication. She had it. She was past needing it from any particular source. She was simply herself, entirely, in a place where entirely was finally available to her. He turned to me, and I understood that I was going back. This is the part that broke me, honestly, that breaks me still when I lie awake at 3 a.m, and the house is quiet, and Percy is asleep in her old childhood room down the hall, where she has been staying since I got out of the hospital. The going back. Not because I didn't want to go back. I did. I have things that are not finished. I have Percy. I have the small, tender dailiness of a life I am not done with. But because of what I was being sent back to, because of the distance between what I had seen and what I was returning to. He said in the reception, not speech, that was our whole conversation, something that I think was meant to be comfort and was also meant to be commission, both at once. Something like, what you have seen is the truth of it. Take it back with you. You will not be able to explain it. You will not be able to say it in a way that makes people who have not seen it understand it the way you understand it now. But you know it. You know it in the part of you that is not words. Live from there. And then the field was gone, and the weight was back, and the heart monitor was making it sound again, and a nurse was saying something in a loud, clear voice, and Percy was awake in the blue vinyl chair with her eyes wide and both her feet flat on the floor. And she said, "Mom," and her voice cracked on the one syllable, the way young voices crack when they have been frightened down to something essential. And I reached for her hand, and I thought about the bird on the windowsill in Valdosta, a tufted titmouse. I know that now. I don't know how I know it, but I do. I have told this story to Percy and to my doctor, a careful and skeptical man named Oleander Fuchs, who listened to the whole thing with his hands folded in his lap, and said afterward that he had heard many accounts of near-death experience, and that what I had described was within the range of what had been reported by others, and that he could not explain it, and would not try to. I have told it to my pastor, a young man named Fen Abaris, who is newer to the work than I am to the living, and who cried a little when I got to the part about the woman laughing, which I found unexpectedly comforting. I have told it to my friend Ruth May Cossett, who has been my nearest friend for 40 years, and who said only, "I always thought there was more to it than they told us." I have not told it to most people. The world has a way of organizing experiences like this one into categories that make them smaller, either skeptical dismissal or a kind of credulous enthusiasm that also in its way makes them smaller. People want the experience to confirm what they already believe, and this one does not comfortably confirm what anyone already believes. What it confirmed was something more elemental, that the universe has an author, and that the author has attention, and that attention is applied without prejudice to everything the author made, and that everything the author made includes every person who has ever drawn breath under this sun, with no exception, with no hierarchy, with nothing left out. I am 73 years old. I am, by the measure of the body, in the long country of the end of things. I have less time ahead than behind. Every morning I wake up and I make coffee in my kitchen in Harrowfield, Ohio, and I look out the window at the yard where the bird feeder is, and I watch what comes to it, and I think about the field. I think about the woman laughing. I think about what he said about the garment and the person inside the garment. I think about what it means to know something in the part of you that is not words. I think about living from there. It is harder than it sounds. I am still a woman made of habits and assumptions and the 1,000 unexamined conveniences of a life lived in the particular circumstances I was given. I still fail. I still sometimes choose the silence that is easier. But I fail now with the full knowledge of what I saw, and that knowledge changes the texture of the failure, makes it harder to be comfortable in, makes it more urgent to address. Percy came to visit last Sunday. She brought her daughter Minnow. That is what we call her. Her real name is Emmeline, but she has been Minnow since she was 2 years old, who is 6 and who has her mother's habit of tucking her feet under herself in chairs. Minnow climbed into my lap and looked at me very seriously and said, "Gran, are you all the way better now?" And I thought, "No, Minnow, not all the way. Not the way you mean, but in some other way, in the way that matters most, in the part that is not words. Yes, all the way better. Better than I have ever been. Better than I knew it was possible to be, here in this particular body, in this particular light, watching the birds come to the feeder, carrying the weight of a life that is finite and therefore precious, and therefore, I understand this now with a clarity that I did not have before, worth using well." The tufted titmouse came to the feeder this morning. I watched it for a long time, and I thought, I remember you. You are small, and you are real, and you have always been exactly what you are, and that is enough. That is more than enough. That is, if you know how to look at it, everything.